That's the biggest hurdle we're facing is, just people being aware of this opportunity, whether it's for a park or a rail. But we're at the crossroads, and future generations will judge our decisions that we make in the next year or two. And we're looking forward to having a productive dialogue this morning and continuing on so that we can all get as much good information as we need to make intelligent decisions for ourselves and our families and generations to come. I've got a formal presentation, but I'll be hopping around a little bit. There were some points made in the previous presentation which I thought was excellent. And it's funny though about perspective. As I'm watching the video and all the slides, I'm not seeing a park. I'm seeing a railroad, and I'm seeing a connection reestablished between the southern part of Queens and the northern or central part of Queens. A connection that was severed almost 60 years ago. And if we're talking about a community-based initiative, we look at the community as Queens. We are the borough of Queens. We're 2.3 million people. It's not just any one particular area. And QueensRail has the unique ability to connect Queens, to make our communities one. And so hopefully, some of these points are addressed in the presentation, and if I miss anything, hopefully in the Q&A afterwards. Let's see. So the first thing are, questions. What is this thing? Where is it? Why do we need it? And if we want it, how do we get it? And this rail line has been known by a variety of names: Rockaway Beach Rail, or Rockaway Beach Line, Rockaway Beach Branch. We prefer to refer to it as QueensRail because it's for Queens, it's for the borough. It doesn't serve any particular community, as I mentioned earlier. It used to connect Ozone Park with LIRRgg Park, which was referred to as White Pot Junction, and it was part of the Long Island Railroad. Long Island Railroad operated for about 70 years, from 1880 to 1952, and they sold it to the city. And then the city promptly disconnected the line between Ozone Park and LIRRgg Park, and then connected the southern half to the A train. So it's kind of ironic, but if you want to go from Rockaway to Flushing, you got to go through Manhattan on the subway. It's kind of ridiculous. So QueensRail would, get that connected. The result is a reduction in time, or a reduction in service, which doubles the time it takes to get from southern Queens to Midtown Manhattan. It used to take about 40 minutes. Now it takes about twice that. Our conservative estimate is that most commuters would be saving a half an hour in each direction, or about an hour a day. So we think that's a very compelling argument for reestablishing this railroad. Thankfully, this right-of-way remains intact, and it's an asset that we should not squander. And most rail projects that people are talking about require a lot of infrastructure changes and eminent domain. There's not a lot of that required for this particular project. So I'm going to just go through a few maps quickly. There are various ways the line can be connected. And the purpose of this presentation is not to advocate for any one particular connection, but rather the fact that this is a transportation link and should be used accordingly. So speedy transportation from south and southern and central Queens. It Resorts World at Aqueduct, they are very much in favor of this, as you can imagine, because it helps to connect them with the huge market in Midtown Manhattan. JFK Airport would also benefit because they would get essentially a one-seat ride to Midtown. Neighborhood beautification, we agree that the right-of-way that exists today is, is an eyesore. Obviously, if we didn't need a railroad, we would be park advocates as well. The park looked beautiful, but we see parks as a luxury and efficient rail transportation as a necessity. I think most of us, when we look back at our recent, just the past week, I know I've relied on transportation, both public and private, a lot more than I've relied on parks. Not to say that I don't love parks and that they're not a big part of my life, but there needs to be a balance. And in Queens alone, there's 435 parks. Forest Park, one of the largest, is 535 acres. And a portion of the railroad goes through there. So it's not about adding 47 more acres of parkland as much as it is about giving people a convenient way of getting to the parks we already have. So it's not just about a railroad where we're going to help people that choose that mode of transportation, but it's going to help alleviate a lot of the congestion that currently exists, which will help speed up buses, cars that are still on the road, and make the road safer for bicyclists. And property values have been known to increase as well. People thrive on good transportation. They move into neighborhoods that offer good transportation. It's as important as a good school. And so we think people along the rail will benefit from the property value aspect as well. There's a lot of objections. Some people say it'll take too long to build. What does that mean? I mean, anything of value takes a long time. And sure, it could be done quicker. There's a lot of bureaucracy in New York, especially with the MTA. But if things that we need are going to take a long time, we should get started right away. Too expensive. It's a cost benefit. What does the community derive from this reconnection? We believe that the economic impact will be a lot more positive as a result of this transportation link being reactivated as opposed to another park. And again, it's, what do we need more? Do we need more parks or do we need more transportation? I think that is going to be the question we all have to answer. We understand that people that abut the train are concerned about the noise, and we would be too if our homes were adjacent to it. And we would demand that the latest in transportation rail technology be employed to make the train as quiet as it possibly can be. And it should be a good neighbor, especially to the people that are closest to it. And we feel that if it's done correctly, it can both act as a transportation link as well as not negatively affect the quality of life of people nearby. We don't want to kill any Little League fields. We love kids, we love baseball, and we're sure that this QueensRail can be built and still accommodate the ball fields that are there, if not enhance them. And it's just a matter of good planning to do that We don't have the details on how that would happen, but that can and should happen. So the MTA is currently completing a study which is due out in June. We're not sure actually as to the scope of that study. We're hoping it does a complete cost-benefit analysis, because it's not just about cost, but it's about, you know, what does the community get out of it. And assuming that we're going to get out of it more than a cost, then it's not an expense, it's an investment. There was a study conducted by Queens College back in 2014, and although there weren't a whole lot of people that responded to that study, it did point to the fact that most people preferred the rail. Governor Cuomo seems to be a very proactive governor relative to transportation infrastructure, but he wants to see what the MTA comes up with. I guess he doesn't want to overstep them, you know, in advance of the study being released. So hopefully he'll be on board when that study is made available. Nassau County sees the advantage of adding another rail in Nassau. The QueensRail will, as I said earlier, connect Rockaway and JFK and Howard Beach to the rest of Queens. And more importantly, we can go the other way as well. You know, Central Queens folks can get to Rockaway Beach a lot quicker, which, you know, may not be that attractive in the wintertime, but in the summer, you know, a lot of people would want to make that trip. Also, the communities in southern Queens are still recovering from Sandy, and the additional people that this rail would help bring in would be welcome. I think I've covered most of this. There is one thing I want to show. It's relative to, you know, some of our best laid plans don't go as well as we would like. And the Trust for Public Land was instrumental in securing some parkland, I believe it was 1.9 acres in Rockaway Beach. It's essentially one of the few waterfront parks that would that the public could have access to. And you know, it seems ironically, as it may seem, people in Rockaway have very limited access to Jamaica Bay. So when we heard that they were coming into town to use Port Authority money to secure this land and then give it to parks to develop into a waterfront park, we were thrilled. Gateway Bike and Boat House is another not-for-profit I'm involved in, and we were involved in several cleanups. We've been trying to work with the Parks Department to put this park into shape. These pictures were taken last week, so almost 7 years since this park was acquired. It's still a lot. And so slides are great, videos are great, good intentions are great, but the Parks Department has a real problem maintaining the parks it has, never mind, you know, taking on another 47-acre project. You know, be careful what you wish for. It's not, you know, not always what we would hope or expect. A couple of other quick points before we go to Q&A. I heard in the presentation earlier that the A train would be somehow impacted. That's not the case. You know, in terms of grassroots, you know, we're trying to raise funding through our council members to get the word out, because you know the Trust for Public Land and Friends of Queensway have been very successful, and congratulations on getting $1 million in state funding for the work you've done so far. So, we feel that it's our obligation to do the best job we can to get the rail side of the story out, so people can also evaluate that in their decision making. 323,000 people within a mile of the right-of-way. We kind of think that makes the case for the railroad, and again, so that we can get to parks that already exist. So it's what I'm hoping is that the Friends of Queensway do not start developing the land until Queens as a community has come to some sort of consensus as to how this right-of-way can best be used. Because once any of this land is developed as a park, it kind of kills the right-of-way as a transportation option for the future. And we've safeguarded this thing for 55 years. And I don't think we want to wait a whole lot longer, but we should wait long enough so that we can get the good information we need to make the best decision possible. Thank you very much for...
Rick and the QueensRail, thank you. Thanks, folks. So, I'd like to get both groups to stand up real quick for the Q&A piece. I'd also wanted to recognize Dan Randell from Assemblywoman Stacey Pfeffer-Amado's office, who just came in. Thanks very much for being here and your support of the process in general. And of course, a great fan and supporter of ours, and we are mutually a great fan and supporter of his, is Hirsch Correct from the Governor Cuomo's office. Hirsch, please. Support and the information we're sharing is just great. So, because I'm up at the lectern and it's the Queens Chamber of Commerce, if you get a chance, put your hand down the back. Thank you. My first question, if you guys don't mind, is to both of you folks, is there a compromise available? It seems like a very, very big place with two very, very important and noble undertakings. Is a compromise possible to have a park and some type of light rail?
Obviously not.
We like each other. No. It's a question that comes up a lot. And I think the big problem is it's not wide enough to accommodate both. You have you just can't have a trail right next to within feet of the train. You have kids and seniors and families and pushing strollers right next to it. So what transportation is a big important part of the Queensway, and I think people like to think of transportation as just rail, and that's not how we look at it. Especially with Woodhaven Boulevard not having SBS, you have a lot of the ability to go north and south in those areas. Transportation for those of us who live here, or live there rather, include the ability to bike, to walk, and to run, and to get to various nodes within the Queensway. And I'm speaking about this also because when we designed this and went through our master planning process, one of the major excitements that we heard and got from the community, as well as this comes up in the school yards and the little leagues. By the way, it would actually it runs right through fields 3, 4, and 5 and the Forest Hills, Little League, and most of 2. But was that the ability to safely take your kid to school, or to safely take your kid to the league, or just to bike. There's nowhere to bike in these areas. So transportation is going to be huge, and Rails to Trails projects have shown really highly beneficial transportation opportunities, and through all the biking and the walking along that we do, and the ability to connect those neighborhoods to those transportation methods is a huge opportunity.
So, in response to that question, any comment, any possibility?
Well, I tend to agree that it seems that it might be too narrow in some spots to accommodate both. And, you know, we think, you know, if you have to compromise either idea too much, you're sort of defeating the purpose. Regarding light rail, I know there's been discussion about various ways of using the right-of-way for transportation, you know, even buses on there, or, you know, some sort of light rail system. Our preference is that it's integrated into the city subway system. Just because the more transfers you have to make, the more time it takes you to get where you're going. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to choose one or the other.
Understood.
And so if I could just comment a little. See, this is also just part of the challenge of this conversation too, is if you talk about this becoming a subway, then you're not actually creating additional access to Rockaways. You're not creating a quicker method to get to JFK. You're not, the commute is not improved. So every time you start to go down the rabbit hole of what the potential rail option is, there are consequences.
Okay, so let's just hold up that thought for the next, just for the record too, the Queens Chamber of Commerce has come out in support of what we affectionately call in Queens the QBX, that rail line from Astoria down to Red Hook, and also Councilmember Crowley's efforts to make a rail line in the old Montauk branch, just because we're very much in support of that. Miss, right there, please.
Good morning.
Identifying yourself. and then
Absolutely.
ask
I'm
your
Vivian
question.
Carter, and I'm the author of Images of America, Rockaway Beach, the Arcadia book that spoke about the reason this train line was built in the 1880s. And one thing, my friend Rick Horan, that I would disagree about is the concept that you wouldn't really care to come to the beach in the winter. Because in the 1880s, the
Can I get a
hotel
question?
that was
I
built.
want to interrupt you for a second. I want to have a question. So
Okay,
can you just
well, the
ask-
question is, why can't we acknowledge that the beach is a magnet? 6,000 room hotel was built in the Rockaways in the 1880s for this line, with 60 to 70,000 passengers coming to the beach in the wintertime. So that
Is
is
there a
why
question-
it was
is there a question
originally
in there?
built.
I really want to keep it to questions, not statements. So is there a question there?
I apologize.
No, no,
I
no
just
worries.
wanted
No
people to
worries.
know the
Just wanna have
history
it not be a
of why the
statement.
line was originally built, and it was built specifically for a hotel, and people had a lot of vision
For the
then,
future,
so.
the next question, please.
Thank you.
Questions, not statements. In the back.
I agree with you, Tom. Why can't we do both? You dike the sides, and we could do the Queen, we could do the bike path, and we could do the rail together. If you dike the sides and make it a step, you could do both. And that way, everybody benefits, and you have a bike path to the train station.
Okay.
Can we do both?
I'm really looking for questions, so.
I'm asking, can you do
No,
either?
no question, I think they answered it, but I'm looking for questions. Miss, please.
Hi, I'm Ann Green. For Rick, so we live a block from the proposed site in Richmond Hill and own a house there for 10 years and used to live in Forest Hills. And I know that there are people who are abutting who are very concerned just even about the park and their property. I know you said that you will seek to use technology to try to make it noiseless and safe, but what do you say to those of us who are along that line, who are going to be very, very impacted by the construction, but also the noise and intensity of the train, and the idea of small children next to it too, and all these play areas in schools? Do you think that the group can really answer that question?
Well, I'm not a transportation expert. I'm just a volunteer that, you know, believes in this particular project. I would leave it to the transportation experts to solve those problems to your satisfaction. You know, we don't want to put our kids in jeopardy. We don't want our house to be vibrating or, you know, to be negatively affected by noise. So those are all very normal concerns, and I would share those if I were in your shoes as well.
Okay, next question. Rob, just identify yourself, please. Stand up.
Rob Nemiroff, I'm a Queens Chamber member. Two quick questions regarding the QueensRail. There were, I think in the last 10 or 15 years, there were stations closed in Glendale, Maspeth, Ridgewood. Wouldn't those stations, if they were reopened, service the majority of these neighborhoods? And also, are there any eminent domain questions in regards to building the QueensRail?
I am not familiar with any specific eminent domain issues. And in terms of the stations that you mentioned, that still would not reconnect central Queens with southern Queens. that doesn't affect that broken link at all, unfortunately. If it did, then we wouldn't be here.
Have any comment on that?
Yeah, just two quick comments. I think also, when you talk about having stations, first of all, those station locations no longer exist. They're now little leagues and parks and parking lot for residents. So, but if you start talking about adding stations, you're slowing down the train. So the concept of the perfect commute, et cetera, is no longer applicable. Also, you mentioned eminent domain. As mentioned, 47 acres of the Queensway, 40 acres, the whole Queensway is owned by the city of New York. 40 acres are in control of the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. 7 acres, the portion that's in Forest Park, is technically parkland. So that has to go through an alienation process. That alienation process includes a home rule message from the city council, state legislation, and then ultimately a replacement of those 7 acres. There's actually legislation pending also, I think, in Albany to make it 4 times as much. It might have to replace 28 acres. And if you look around these neighborhoods, there's not even a place to put 3 acres over in 7. So that is a challenge.
You, sir.
My name's Gene Fowle. I was wondering, you're in favor of linear parks because that improves transportation. Why don't you propose ripping up the pavement on Queens Boulevard and Woodhaven Boulevard and planting grass and making that into a park? Wouldn't that also improve transportation?
Not sure what.
You don't think so? Why do you?
Woodhaven and Queens Boulevard.
Parks are much better than transportation, right?
Not sure I understand the question.
Well, I don't understand it when you talk about making the QueensRail line into a place so people can get north-south, because they can't walk on city streets, right? Is that correct? I don't understand your logic.
Have you seen the site?
Yes, I have seen the
So
site.
the site goes right next to schools. There are no, that's not Queens Boulevard. That's
There-
right between.
There are
Queens
no
Boulevard,
streets there, excuse me, sir.
Woodhaven and.
Sorry. I've been there. There are no streets, this is New York City. It's no more than 5 blocks from Woodhaven Boulevard.
Yes.
So how does this improve north-south transportation by making it into a park? Which is what you said.
People use parks all the time to walk, to bike.
Yes, people
Yeah,
use
for
parks,
transportation.
but you said that you have to get into your car, you have the Forest Park.
Correct.
But if this were built as a park,
Right.
you would not have to get into your car.
It
Why
would be
can't
much
you
easier
walk
to get
down
to
the
park.
street today?
I could walk down the street, but
So
I'd have to
you
go
don't
around the
want to.
circuitous way to get to Forest Park.
You don't want to. The fact is, you've got a couple of $1 million of government funding, you've got how many paid people here to disadvantage the people of Queens?
How is it disadvantaging the people?
Because people who want to get,
So let me ask you this question.
Let
Have
me
you been?
just moderate for a second. I think you asked your question, I think you answered it, so thank you for your support.
I could say.
Yeah, hi,
this was
my
a-
name's Walter Sanchez.
I've been to, and people, volunteers and friends of the Queensway, Chuck Boatman, have been to no less than 75 community meetings with schools, community organizations, at people's homes, et cetera, to talk about specifically this issue. And what I hear all the time is that one of the things they love about the Queensway is the ability to walk to the various community facilities. Right now, it's unsafe, and right now, it's difficult, we can't get into it.
I've been to some of
And
the
that's
meetings,
one of.
and I've heard
let me
people
finish,
shout
let me
you
finish,
down.
Let me finish. And that's one of many various values and benefits of the Queensway, including health, including recreation, et
Okay,
cetera.
so the good news is, we have the room for a while after the Q&A. If you want to continue the discussion on that particular topic, terrific. Sir,
Walter Sanchez, Queens Forest Times newspapers. A question for the Queensway rep. You talked about helping the economy, that the park would help the economy, it's good for business.
Sure.
Can you give me, we've all heard about the High Line and but how, so other than the High Line, I mean, how do you think this would help? I mean, it's a little different, you know, in Manhattan and give us some examples of how it would help the economy.
Sure, I'll give you. Number one is the Queensway will be attractive, so it will be a place where people will convene, people will want to experience, and people, when they come to this experience, they will be hungry, they will want to, they will walk by and see for the first time what's going on in Metropolitan Avenue, what's going on in Jamaica Avenue, what's going on in Atlantic Avenue, Rockaway Boulevard, and they'll want to go eat, they'll want to go shop, etc. That is a constant benefit of rails to trails projects across the world. The High Line is a completely different example of economic development on tremendous, it's just been tremendous.
So be a tourist, you're saying will be kind of be a tourist? That, when you go to a park, you like, I don't go with that, but.
Not just only tourists, but I think, like I live in Forest Hills, so I go to Queensway and I bike with my kids down to Whitby, and I'll go to Jamaica Avenue and have someone eat, and that would be a boost for those locals. That's one way. I think that will, these projects have shown, surveys and studies have shown that there are increases in property values, there's job creation, both in construction and sort of indirect jobs as a result of the local boost. So you see a big uptake in economic.
Kindly identify yourself, please.
Sal Capati, I'm on one of the chamber members, as well on the board of directors of Park Trust. And we have a trust basically because we can't afford to maintain Forest Park.
Right.
So I can't see where right now we're having a problem trying to buy equipment to maintain Forest Park.
Yeah.
So we have a trust right now, which Prospect Park has. How are you gonna afford this situation where we can't even take care of what we have now? Look at Flushing Meadow. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. We have a New York State pavilion that's sitting there for how many years, and it's just sitting there not being used. Now we found money for it. I think we need to take care of what we have now.
Right.
And
First of
Haven
all-
Boulevard, you can't even go, you have to go down Haven Boulevard from 3 in the afternoon till 6. It's from Queens Boulevard all the way up to Union Turnpike. It's stop traffic.
Well, first of all, I don't do things in Forest Park, and one of the things that we hear constantly is and the excitement of Queensway is people actually being able to access Forest Park better. And I think one of the things that we've talked about, I think we've talked about even just some of the people on the board, is how can we coordinate with Forest Park together and make this project a rising tide that lifts all boats, so that both a joint sort of Queensway Forest Park solution is created. So we love to have more. I know there's some people on our group who are members of the board, and I know there's members of our group that are members of Community Board 9, and this is something that we really want to sort of coordinate with as we continue down the path of the creation of Queensway.
Sir, identify yourself, please.
Willie Soprano, first chapter of the American Institute.